I see that in the WhatsApp, a couple of them will be late, so hopefully they will join pretty soon. So let me go and start recording that. And oh, we already are. So to conclude our program, and that has been a long journey. But what I think I want to talk today is that when we think about leadership development, when we think about going through some of those challenges and some of those best practices that we have in the Silicon Valley and beyond, I really want to focus on what it means on the innovation standpoint, right? When we're thinking about what does it take to be innovation leader, what does it take to be innovative leader that moves the company forward? What does it mean to be a leader that facilitates innovation within the organization? Because I think right now, according to many researchers, that this is one of the key points of the executives and the management of the big companies, is that how do we become more innovative? And when we think about this, so right now, I want to really bring everything back that we went throughout those 6 modules to really trying to reconstruct what actually innovation is and how the things that were told by our speaker goes back to this leadership for innovation. And this is sort of our personal Silicon Valley Innovation Center mantra, is that no one actually needs innovation. Companies need changes in people, processes, and technology. So by having this, right, it's usually, and you probably experienced that in your real life, when people come to you and say, hey, we want to do more innovation, we want to be more innovative. They usually have a very particular idea in mind. We need to implement, we need to build out, we need to do something, or they have no idea and they just trying to start the conversation. And when it comes down, I really want to focus on those 3 major areas as a point of reflection to something that we have done in the programs. So the first thing that I want to talk is obviously people. And people are very, very important, obviously, to every organization. And I think really 2020 showed us that people is the core asset of every company. Meaning that without people, you cannot do work. Without your customers, you cannot do work. But also without your teams, you cannot do work. And when we think about it, that how can we actually empower our people to be the better version of themselves? And people is one of those really interesting things that it's really hard to measure return on investment for people, but then at the same time, it's one of the most investable things ever, right? So if you think about it, if you spend on the education, if you spend on training, if you spend on empowering, the culture that you'll be able to create based on those investment in your people, in your internal organization, will drive the profits for the longest time. If you look at the Amazon, it's not really about it's not really about just a hard investment. It's also a lot of soft investment in the people, that they have created the culture of excellence. They have created a culture that keeps on generating positive returns, because even as people leave, culture stays the same. And that's, I think, is very important. So when we think about it, right, we have our employees, we have our teams, and as I said, we have our customers. And employees is definitely in the center of everything that we do as a company, because, well, you do not have companies without employees. And one of the bigger notions that we saw, and some of that has been presented, is that you have you have your employees, right? You have your employees, and we really talk about this asset driven to people driven transformation, right? Is that first, the companies were really focusing on those assets. We have been focusing on the factories, we have been focusing on the cell towers, we have been focusing on the physical assets. But in the last 20 years, and 2020 just s- amplify that, is that shift from the asset driven to the people driven process is really move forward. And right now in the United States, there is a very big shortage of the software engineers. Why? Because the more and more company went online, more and more company went virtual, and they need people. They need people to actually go and work, and they don't really have it, because people are the ones who driving the value right now. And If we think about further about what Amazon has been saying to us, right, is that they really look at it the same way. They look at that DNA that they have in their hiring process, is that how they try to find the person who has all of those things in their DNA, right? So they're not trying just to say, come and do a certain job. They're really trying to look for that mentality, that DNA that would allow their employees to be leaders. And that's, I think, a very important point, is that you looking for the people who are not afraid to be the leaders, right? Who not afraid to experiment certain things. And only then your employees can feel empowered, but also they can create this constant increase in the ROI. So we saw the same with the Google presentation and some of those Dropbox goals, right? That if you look about all of this, right, it's really comes down to how are you making your company healthy? How do you make your employees that inside your company healthy from the professional standpoint? And that's something that we heard over and over again. This is how the Silicon Valley companies grow. They all give all those perks. They all give all of those benefits to the companies. Why? Because as company grows, as this the startup mentality, as those startups grow, they cannot afford lose people, because to them, you losing every person is losing that growth. And I think a lot of big established companies having a hard time thinking about it, is that on the bigger scale, obviously, if you have thousands and thousands of people, losing one person is not a big deal. But losing one person slows the machine just a little bit. And if you keep losing one person every other day, it actually quite slows the whole process. So that's why a lot of those startups, a lot of those companies are really focusing on building building that employee culture. And then when we think about the teams, right? Because we can only do as much with by ourselves, right? And I think that one of the things that the WebEx was saying, right, is that how do you actually build the team, so not only one person feels comfortable and feel empowered, but teams feel empowered and feel uncomfortable. And I think that this becomes a very interesting topic. And I know that there's only so much we can change in our position. We're not on the very top, but nevertheless, think about it when we talk about this individual autonomy and individual empowerment, what actually goes into this, right? And we have been talking several times about, is that what tools do you have for people to feel comfortable, feel empowered, but then at the same time interact with each other. And then on the same time, that we need to realize that our teams are different. I just had a conversation with we had two groups of people. One were senior management, one were junior managers, and one were saying, no, we love working from home, but we love working from office. And a lot of junior people were willing to go back because they do not have as good of the home office as some of those senior people. But then on the other side, they really enjoy traveling. So there is really a lot of those things that really require our consideration to build this new model. And obviously, we're thinking about tools, right? And we have been talking with Slack about it. Is that Slack is one of those options that allows a better communication. And it's obviously Slack is not only one. We have Teams, we have many others. But the idea of the Slack is that it's really trying to create that good experience for the teams. How can they work together? How can they join together to be a better version of themselves? And I think another very important point about the team is that actually teams are built around great managers. And we talk about those great managers, and this is a slide from Google from Aparajita, is that we really need to understand that the team on the one side, it's a functional unit, so you obviously need to do a certain work around it, but it also associate, it's also a community. And I think that this part about team being a community, team being of something more than just their functions, is extremely important. And that's where managers come in, is that managers can build that team. They can align the team. They can coach the team. And that what makes people belong, right? Not only that they heard that they have the tools, but also they have managers who build community out of the team. And then when we talk about some of those with the Azure, when we talk about some of those more soft practices, right, is that when we go right, and this I think a very very good point here is that when we talk about the teams, when we talk about it, really comes down to this community of way of working, communal way of working, but also the shared values. So it's really hard to inspire people to do something if they don't actually feel that belonging towards them. And when we talk about this, right? So when we talk about the customers, when we build the team, when we have all those managers, when we have the ways to manage them and work through them and build that sense of community, now we really need to think about our customers. And well, one of you might argue that the customers come first, but I really think that the you cannot, and we're going to talk more a little bit about it, is that you cannot build a good customer experience without building that good employee and team experience. That you cannot build something to accommodate for the customers if your teams are dysfunctional. And I really like the Zappos presentation about it because I really think it focused on the customer as a person, but also on the people in general. That few of those slides and a few of those organizations, and I'm going to show a little bit more from the Salesforce and others, actually talked about money, right? It really talked about the people, because money follow the right organization, right understanding of customers. And I think when Zappos came to it and they said, okay, when we have those customers, when we really understand our customers from the empathetic standpoint, from the people standpoint, things start to change. And then when we think about also knowing our customers, right, is that what actually goes into that from the statistical standpoint. With Zappos, we talk about empathy. We talk about almost like with the people connection, right? Is that can I talk to you? But with this slide that was from the Salesforce, I think they talked a lot more about the data, and I'm going to come back to this. But it really comes down is that do you actually hear? Do you actually hear your customer? And do you hear your customer both as those who bring you money and those who actually work for you, because in a lot of cases your customer are your internal teams, and how not only you build your own team, but how do you build the other team who are internal customers. And I think it's really important to have those statistics to understand how they do and what they work and how they work. But then at the same time, I think it's really important to understand that customers really, that mindset about trying to learn as much as you can is something that differentiates the companies in the future. And then when we think about this sort of Kuhn cycle that we have talked about in some of our presentation, it's really about this being ready of this paradigm shift, right, of what is happening inside of our organization. And that portion, I think, that Kuhn cycle that we see right now, this model crisis that we have, and then we have the model revolution. I think one thing that is really changing is that B2C has been really driven by this customer experience, by this customer centric experience. And what I think is the most interesting process of, and the most interesting final sort of nail in the coffin of the modern system, is that with so many people going completely online and so many people experiencing this B2C, more and more people start to understand that B2B, that the businesses or internal teams is nothing more than the same consumer. It's the same customer that is doing B2C. So if we want to build this new version of the B2B business, we cannot shy away from the BTC trends. It is impossible. We really need to focus on the experiences And then we also need to think about how it's actually been changing. If people get used to the Amazons of the world, are you providing a similar experience? If the people get used to the Facebook or Instagram or TikToks of the world, are you providing this experience to your customers? Because, well, guess what? They spend so much time on all of those apps. And when they go to you and it's slow and it's laggy and it doesn't give them as the same experience as it out there, they're gonna use it less. And then they're kind of bringing those things together. And I really like this Conway's law from the Salesforce presentation that we have, is that it's impossible to create a new product for the customer without actually creating a new internal change, right? So you cannot create a change for the customer without creating this internal change. And that, I think, where customers really come to play, so to speak, is that you really need to understand your customers. You really need to understand how they operate, but then at the same time, only your team, only your internal organization can really build something different if they feel empowered. And we're going to talk more about it. If they feel strong about all of those things, then they will be able to build something new as something great, because the legacy organization cannot create the innovative product. And that, I think, a very, very interesting thought is that if you're trying to be modern, your organization need to be modern. Some of those principles that are currently in the Silicon Valley, you cannot compete with these startup companies without implementing some of that startup culture and startup processes and technologies and the way they treat people, because then your experience is going to be lacking of that. And then I think one of the very interesting topics that we saw over and over and we heard over and over again was empathy, right? So when we talk with the Genesis, we're talking about empathy, right? Is that how do we actually make empathetic? How do we open ourselves and treat everyone around us, customers, employees, teams, managers, with empathy? Can we actually listen and understand and then act on that? Can we really internalize what those people are saying and what those people are feeling? And that's extremely important. And the same thing goes, and I just did several examples here, but it really, with Google, we had exactly the same thing, is that you need to lead with empathy. You really need to understand what is happening. And that's about the people. So how about we do this? How about I quickly put you into three-minute breakout room. So we have, I think we're going to equally split within our teams. And please discuss what are some of the things that I heard about people in the organization that really stroke your mind. So I selected mine, right? I selected several of the slides that I think was very interesting. But what stroked your mind when you think about the people in our program? What was some one thing that really made you interested, that really popped up? And obviously, I don't expect you to go and remember everything, but something that you heard, something that still sticks in your mind, would be extremely great to hear from you. So let me put you quickly in the breakout rooms so you can quickly discuss just for 2 or 3 minutes about what did you remember about the people that you thought was great in the Silicon Valley, and maybe something that you want to do, or maybe something that you started to do in Vodafone. So let me go and quickly do this. So we're just going to do it for 3 minutes, and then that'd be it. So let's talk about what did you remember in the program about the people that was really interesting to you. So I'm opening the rooms. So please join your breakout rooms. Emma, perfect. Thank you. All right, everyone, welcome back. So, do you mind sharing what do you have to discuss? So in room one we had a Gary and Motas. Do you mind discussing what stroke to you as one of the people aspects of the how things are done in Silicon Valley?
Actually, me and Garhi were thinking that people overall should be assigned to tasks or projects. Um, um, yeah, the selection of people to be
Mm-hmm.
assigned to projects and automation processes.
Mm-hmm.
The criteria should be selecting the efficient people and the people that capable to or accepting the process, the change of
Mm-hmm.
processes and automation. Okay, and
Yeah.
always investing in people and have the mentality of creating the initiatives for automation in the company. Because if you are assigning people for a new project, for example, and they are not accepting the methodology of changing
Yeah.
process or automation, this will be a very big failure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the I'm sorry. So the last part. So the kickoff of any new project or automation process is people and assigning the efficient people.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. Right? It's almost like you can spend so much time on trying to convince people of the idea, but it's much better to spend the time and that energy on the early adopters who already want to do that. Right? It's much faster and much better. Thank you. Great feedback. Team two. So we had Omar, with Amar, and I think we have Ayman. So do you mind?
Yeah,
Do you mind sharing what stood out to you?
Sure. Amar, if you would like to start with the remote working part.
No, no, you go ahead, go ahead. Yeah, yeah, go ahead, yeah, Ayman.
Okay. Okay. We thought of two things. The first one was related to providing enablers for the people, mainly for the employees, to be able to deliver their work remotely in the new norm we have currently. This is one thing, and the other thing was related to Google lecture, the first one I remember,
Mm-hmm.
when they made a trial to check the reason or the main importance of having managers to support their teams, and when they
Mm-hmm.
tried to for the manager to step out for a few months and try what will happen, and then they figured out the reason for having managers and for coaching their teams and setting a clear strategy and ensuring there is no deviation from each one, and all are directed toward the same goal. So these mainly are the two things we remembered.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Sounds good. Omar, you want to add anything to it?
No, no, I agree with what Ayman said, and nothing extra to add. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much. So let's continue, right? And there are a couple of things about technology that I think we all have to realize. And I would obviously go into much more detail about it, but a couple of the things that I think are extremely important, right, is that technology within itself is not no longer is an actual value provider. If you look like 20 years ago, with the 20 years ago, you install your Word, you install your spreadsheets, and it's actually changed the things. You just give people technology, and it was so new and it was so much more efficient than the previous way of doing that. It was providing the value from the very beginning, but it's not anymore. Then we just talked about this sympathy, right? And then we talked about that person part of everything. But then we at the same time we're talking about the big data. So how do you actually balance that big data and that empathy, right? And this is very important part in the technology, that we want to understand people from their data perspective, and we want to suggest them based on the data. But every suggestion, every algorithm is just a best attempt, right? It's never 100% statistically perfect. So what we need to do is that we really need to think, how do you balance that data, that statistics, that number on the screen with the actual person? And then there's also one more very important part, is that it's for the big organization, it is almost impossible to keep up with the latest things. It's just too fast. It's just changing too fast. It's just developing too fast. By the time you look into some technology, by the time you put comedians around it, it this technology is almost outdated, and we're going to talk more a little bit about it. So when we think about this, right, is that, and I think that Salesforce slide was really good about this technology, not a value provider. And effectively, what it said, just to remind you, is that when we adapt that CRM, when you adapt this data, yes, it creates grades for the CIO, EVP, all of those sales managers, all of this is great, right, for the monitoring the activity, but that it does not actually provide the value for the people who doing the selling. And obviously is that when you have a better transparency, you can make a better decision. So one can say that just using that technology allowed company to make better decisions, but then at the same time, at the core, it did not provide the value. And that's very important when you think about really technology and that value. Is the technology helping everyone involved? And if it's not helping your sales team to do better job, maybe you can think about a middle ground. We really think about top management coming as a priority always, and that's obviously inevitable because we do have hierarchy. But then at the same time, that lower level, can we balance those interests so we can create the value for both the top management and the low manage and the managers and the line employees who are actually doing the work? Can we create some middle ground here? The same thing was when we talked about the Genesis and their bot, right? Is that the bot that was developed was not good, right? Is that it's if you give them that experience, you really have to integrate it within your organization. Your technology, the best, the shiny technology out there, cannot exist in vacuum. It really has to be a part of your ecosystem. And that's one of the things is that every technology needs to be integrated. Every technology needs to be a part of your solution. If you have some antiquated software that is hard to connect, that is hard to operate, that is hard to maintain, that is hard to do, both internally and externally, well, it's not providing any value. It's really not thinking from that customer perspective, from that value perspective. Then obviously one of the very interesting things that I think I liked about Amazon, besides their hiring and culture, is this, right? Is that Fire phones and all of those other failures that we have, and we had VJ talking about it, and we had Amazon talking about it, that sometimes is that technology fails, project fail when it comes down to technology. But it's not about really the failure in the big organization. It's about what can you salvage, and are you thinking about those salvage strategies going into the project? And then when we sort of think about this, right? And then Omar, to your point, is that when we think about from WebEx, when we were talking, right? When we talk about this flexible working and hybrid working, so it's really this again. There is nothing different if you think about it. There is nothing different from the technology standpoint between the flexible working that is very sort of antiquated by now, and the hybrid working. There is no difference in technology, using the same tools, using the same thing, but it's the processes that surround the technology. This is the way that you base those results, how you use that technology to set those results, and how do you achieve them. And that's, I think, is really important part, is that the differentiator, not in technology, but how do you integrate it into your processes. And I mean, and sometimes people overdo it, as Matthew was showing with this one, is that, well, how about we do the water bottle speaker with the Bluetooth technology, which is kind of crazy, right? Who needs that? Sometimes just slapping technology on something does not provide the value. And then the other interesting point is that when we talk about the gaps, right? When we talk about what is happening with all this technology, sometimes you can build this technology, sometimes you can make it work even great, but then you wouldn't know what to do with that. You might build the best data collection software out there, the best data collection system, but you wouldn't have people who can analyze it for you. And that's again, that's extremely important, that not only you need to have the processes and the ecosystem around it, but you also need people and the skills to consume that technology, because once you build out, what's next? What is your plan? You collected the data, so what? The same goes about the data, right? And we obviously know that the data is growing. There is so much data is being created that we have this AI fuel, right? We have more and more exponential data growing, and it's really easy to look at the person as in terms of statistics, where they are, how do they fit, what are some of those things that are happening, right? And that's obviously something that Salesforce, and that was, by the way, the previous slide was from Dell. This slide, when we talk about the Salesforce, it's really goes down about, yes, it is very extremely valuable to their organizations, right? And then sometimes they feel that they do not collect enough data, but that data costs very little until you can relate it to the person, be it an employee, be it an investment, be it a customer, right? How do you connect that data to that personal experience? And how can you try to make this data just work around your uh, your personal experience, your customer experience? Again, be it employee, be it other teams, be it your actual customers. And you know, and I think that that Zappos showed a really good way that the customers are not statistics. That at the end of the day, that we need to really think about, what if our algorithms are wrong? We're doing this fitting, we're trying to predict our model. Our model is good, but what in this one instance, our model is wrong? What effect will it have? Well, you know, if it suggests something irrelevant, well, I mean, maybe I lost the opportunity to upsell, but it's not bad, right? But if you do something like we saw with American Airlines, when our algorithm kind of tried to do our best effort to identify a particular person, but then suddenly they do something that is damaging, that becomes a problem, right? And that's I think is the same things when you kind of think about it, right? Is that when we think about what WebEx was doing in their sense, right? They are digital company, right? They are trying to connect things together. They are collecting a lot of data, but again, everything is really data is just supplement to the personal approach. And what I really like is this flywheel. And that flywheel, what I liked about it is that the Amazon is probably the most data centric company out there. They have the best algorithms, they have the best way to process. It is built in their ecosystem, right? So when I was saying their technology is very fully built in the ecosystem. But if you look into this growth wheel, one thing that is not here, right? That is not indicated by any shape or form. There's no data, there's no technology, there is nothing that goes around more than just trying to build the ecosystem. And in the middle of all of this, all the arrows go to this customer experience. And that's really what we need to think about, is that we start with the customer experience and how we can use the data to improve that experience, be it a customer, be it an employee. And then this one of the very interesting thing about it, right, is that we generate so much data, as Salesforce showed us, right, is that how do we actually collect all of this data and put it out? But then obviously we create the data in such a massive format that it's almost impossible to keep track of all of that, right? And that's, I think it's really important, is that if we think, as Genesis showed us, about this exponential technology as they grow, you really need to be careful about, what do you consider exponential technology? What do you use for that, right? How do you make sure that you bulletproof yourself with your strategy? Because running after the shiny thing right now is great. It's what we need to do, but we really need to think about it. The exponential growth will happen. And how do we handle that exponential growth? Are we thinking about it? What if this new initiative that we're starting right here, right now, will grow exponentially? Do we have enough resources to actually build this, to make this thing happen? And then I really like this slide from, I believe it was from Redina's presentation, is that the technology, and it just goes up, right? And that the organizations are slow. Organizations are slow to adapt those technologies, but not even only even that, right? It's also the fact that those technology often comes from a lot of organizations who are really on the edge, right? And they have very little things to care about. An organization such as yours, or such as the banks that I have worked for all my life, they just slow. They have their own business to do. For someone, technology is their core business. But for us, technology is not our core business. We need to intake this technology and integrate it into our environment. And how do we do that? How do we make sure that we as an organization can keep up with the relevant technologies? And I think 5G is a great example, right? Is that 5G is great. And Intel was one of those things that actually showed us, hey guys, you know what? We're doing a lot of great things, but we can give you that technology, but that depends on you. What are you going to do with it? We can give you 5G, and if you don't do anything, it's just going to be a better search experience, better internet experience. It's going to be a faster experience. That's really the one thing that 5G brings. But are you thinking what 5G can bring to your customers that was not possible before? What are some of the things besides faster speed that 5G can bring to your company? And one of the interesting things that I want to highlight that I kind of saw from some of those companies who saw the growth in the 2020. So when the COVID came, something became very, very apparent when we talk about this too fast to keep up. And I really like this approach about the Microsoft, about how they actually restarted and how they reshaped given the crisis. And it's interesting what they did, but let me give you this slide to maybe emphasize something that I have shown, that I have seen, right? Is that when Cisco is thinking about them being sort of leaders and one of the best places to work, is that it says they were underway with their hybrid workplace journey. And the thing was that they were just in position to do that. And the same goes with the Microsoft, right? If you are a company who's doing releases every quarter, 4 times a year, right? And then all of your processes and everything inside your organization is tailored to do this 4 times a year, and suddenly pandemic hit, you'll not be able to respond to something fast in a week basis, because not only you will need to respond to those changes, right? You suddenly managing the crisis, but you not only you managing the crisis, now you need to change your entire organization. And that's why technology is great, but in order to keep up with this, you really need to build the processes and build them ahead of the time. Without being agile in the calm time, so to speak, you'll not be able to be agile at the time of the crisis. One of the ways why Goldman Sachs survived really well in 2008, because their processes were much faster, much more agile, much more flexible than all the other banks. And that's really the only thing that would differentiate them, is that they were able to make a decision faster because they were taking decision faster before the pandemic. And that's important thing, is that you really need to build their processes. You really need to build these processes to connect people and technologies around that. And we're talking about this sort of, we need to connect the people, we need to connect them with the technology, but we need to connect them together. We also need to create this agility, and then we also need to create the culture. And I think like one of the things that are really interesting about connecting those ideas, right, and connecting those technologies is really this DevOps. As Dell showed us, is that DevOps is a very strong point, is that if you develop software, you need to maintain it. And I think it's completely fair. I've done it at Goldman Sachs. I think it's a great way to learn your customer, to learn your software, and to learn how it works, really understand what is happening in the real life. And then when Manisha was saying this, right, is that how do you actually bring those new technologies on? Well, quite simple. You build those processes, those internal idea labs, and she had other great ideas in her slide about how can we bring those new ideas. And the funny thing is that some of those technologies, some of those connecting technology to people does not need to be actually done by someone. Maybe someone in sales sees something that they would love their company to implement, but they can't do it because, well, they're salespeople, they're not engineers. So I think that this is very important, to bring a customer voice, a human voice to the technology that we're trying to onboard. And then I think that one of the interesting things that that Amazon did that I really liked is that they do have this self-service platforms, meaning, and Azure does that, and all the other companies do that, is that I don't need to get somebody's permission to buy a server or try something. You can actually empower your people to go in and experiment and play with it. Especially engineers love playing with the new technology. So give them that sandbox. And I think is that also what IBM told us, right, is that this piecemeal approach to the innovation usually fails, right? Is that you cannot just implement it into one place and then just walk away. And that's, I think, is a very, very important point, is that how do we provide them enough technology and enough connection to actually build this ecosystem? And I think I really liked this a slide from Zappos, is that where they were saying, well, let's try to really connect the people around the common goal. And that's when this empathy and teams and managers come together, is that you need to have the processes of how do you connect people together and build on it. Same for the genesis, right? It really goes around the person, but then everything else is just evolves around it, right? And I think and I think it's a really important point here, that really to build the process of how can we connect people together. The same idea was there with this connection with the customer managed focused, is that if you have a salesperson who knows their needs of their customers, they need to be able to connect with everyone in an organization to try to upsell, to generate that additional revenue. And then the same thing goes about Airbnb, as Redina was saying, right? Is that how do you actually connect with those people, right? And how do you use those leadership practices to really build those teams? Do you have the process that people going from team to team, from manager to manager, can follow and can expect in their team building activities? Then obviously the core framework, right? The communication, when we talk about the consistent, open, real, and educational, becomes extremely important as well, because we try to understand how can we express ourselves, especially right now in this disconnected world. How can we use communication to connect better with ourselves? And then the same thing goes with the day one. And this is what I liked about, right, is that high velocity decision making, something that I said about the Goldman Sachs and Microsoft and Cisco, right, is that you need to have that ability to make decisions fast. And then it really comes down to this sort of agility perspective, right? Is that how can you embrace changes fast, and how you can revert changes fast? Maybe that didn't work. Maybe that something has changed, right? And then when we think about bringing some other things in, right? Something that Manisha said is that I think this innovation ambassadors, about how can you actually go and try to do some of those things? How can you build the process so you can go and try new technologies and adapt new technologies and do them? Because in case you need to do something fast, you already have the process of fast decision making and onboarding those new technologies. And then silos, right? Silos is one of those things that really hurt us, as was shown in a great example by Zappos, right? Is that how can you actually put everyone together on the same page? How can you build those processes so that agility is organizational? And one of those and one of those topics, as Amazon was saying, right, is that have those smaller teams who can work together, who do not depend on anyone else, right, and really can work autonomously to deliver something. And the same goes again to this Conway's law. I told you that I really liked it, is that because it gives us that view of, like, you cannot create the agile product that can change the customer needs fast if your organization cannot change fast. If you don't have internal processes to get that agility based on your customer feedback, you'll never be able to create this really one of the kind customer experience. And then I think when the Matthew was saying about the agility, he said exactly this, right? Is that you need to really just get together and empower your people to embrace that change and modify that change. And then the last part, I really wanted to just say culture, right? Is that, do you have a processes of building the culture? Do you have a processes of how do you take that new person or that old person and you embed them into this new culture of innovation, new culture of customer obsession, people obsession, and you build that, so to speak, heart that really connects people together to create better products, to create better customer experience that will drive better revenue. Is that one I think the biggest lesson from the Silicon Valley is that despite the fact that people investing billions and billions of dollars in Q1, there has been $75 billion invested by the venture capital. But majority of the stories is actually not about the business. It's about solving the customer problem. It's solving the customer as an internal team. It can be your consumer, it can be your business, it can be something, but it really comes down to building the one experience and doing it better than anyone else. There has been very few businesses that are really revolutionary. There has been Facebook, there has been nothing like Facebook before, and that's pretty much it, right? Everything else, there are very few things that are very innovative. Airbnb is just a better experience than a hotel. We had bed and breakfasts, they just made it better. Uber is more or less a taxi service, right? It's just done a little bit better. Google, yes, it's searching, but their revenue model is not really about searching. Their revenue model is advertisement. It's just a better experience to find something, and then we can advertise to you better because we know you better. We know what you search, and that's really what comes down. It comes down to this: are you solving? Are you creating a better experience? So on that note, thanks so much, and I know we have 6 minutes left. So do you have any questions? And I know that I kind of just summarized everything, but do you have any questions?
Thank you from my side.
Thank you, Vilas. It's very clear.
Right. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we'll have a speaker from Facebook. Oh yes, from Facebook, right? I'm not I'm not tripping. So we how about we take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're gonna be back at